Shall we get going?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So shall we do Habermas?
I have realized if we have to do Habermas and all these people, we'll have to do Marx. So let's do Marx very quickly. The important elements of Marxist thought, because most of the time Habermas is reacting to Marx. And therefore, in fact, even if you look at Foucault, Foucault is also reacting to Habermas's idea of, not Habermas's, I'm sorry, Marx's idea of history. So let's quickly do Marx today.
Okay.
Then you'll understand the others better. Okay, Karl Marx in his younger days was a part of the young Hegelian movement. That was taking place in Germany, this particular movement. So the thing that needs to be understood is that Marx started off as a young Hegelian. And it's only much later that he developed differences with Hegel when it came to the idea of history. What are the differences that he developed with Hegel? Number one, it's the dialectics. Number two, the purpose of history. About both these things, Marx developed a difference of opinion, among many other things. I am talking only about those which you people need to know. Uh, so, if you look at the dialectics, I told you that the dialectics in Hegel are ideal. They are ideal in the sense of we understand history dialectically. History is moving. We don't know how it is moving. It's moving. But we understand the movement of history dialectically as an idea. That is the thing that you find in Hegel. And I also told you that Hegel sees a purpose for history, and the purpose of the history is the self-realization of the Geist or the infinite spirit. Now, Marx began to differ on these things. He believed that dialectics were not simply those which you use in order to think as opposite categories or categories that negate themselves till such time that they cannot be any more negation. He didn't see it that way. And he also did not see any purpose of history, which was predetermined. So, what is it that Marx says about dialectics? Marx, I told you, please do not put dialectical materialism into Marx, because that would be doing him a very big disfavor. What you should understand is that Marx believed that the movement of history is dialectical. What exactly did he mean by the movement of history being dialectical? So let's start with his own classification of history. He says people started their lives as hunter-gatherers, and they lived in, small bands or small groups.
Sir,
Yeah.
then is Marx also not saying the same thing that history is moving dialectically as what Hegel said?
Hegel did not say history is moving dialectically. Hegel said that our understanding of history should be dialectical, because Hegel didn't at any point claim that there were opposing forces in history that were impelling history forward, which is the kind of argument that you would find in Karl Marx. Okay. So if you look at Hegelian dialectics is your way of thinking. And what is your way of thinking? Your way of thinking is, like I told you, it's not like what Johann Fichte said. Everything is a thesis, it has an antithesis, and then it has the compromise between the thesis and the antithesis is the synthesis. That is not what Hegel ever said. Hegel simply said dialectics is a series of negations. So let me give you an example without wasting too much time. So you go to GVK 1, that's what it's called, isn't it? That big mall, GVK 1, you decide to go to Inox to watch a film of your choice. And from behind, you see a person. And this person is fat and he looks like me, wearing t-shirts and trousers. So you might think, is this Satish Chandra? So that's a doubt. You're not sure that this is Satish Chandra or this is not Satish Chandra. You have a doubt. Is this Satish Chandra? So while you're thinking, this fat man moves a little more forward. Then you decide, let's see if it is Satish Chandra or not Satish Chandra. So you go nearer. As you go nearer, it is still not clear to you whether this person is Satish Chandra or not Satish Chandra, because he still looks the same fat blob that he is. And then you'll say, let me go a little closer. You go a little closer and you find that this person is different completely. When you look at his face, from behind, he looked like Satish Chandra, but he didn't look like, he is not Satish Chandra because he doesn't look like him at all when you see him from the front. So what have you done here? There was a doubt. Is this Satish Chandra, this fat blob walking in front of us? Is this Satish Chandra? Through a series of steps, literally, you walk faster, you go to the left, you try to catch a glimpse of the person's face. You end up doing that. And while doing that, you are confronted with the idea that you get to see the person's face, and that is a giveaway. So the person is not Satish Chandra. Let me give you another scenario. You see a fat blob in front of you. t-shirt, trouser, some stupid footwear, and this person is basically walking with a stick. The stick looks like the stick that is used by Satish Chandra. So you'll say, let us go and see if it is him only. So again, you do a little bit of a detour. You still can't get near. Whenever you're seeing him from a distance, from behind, it does look like Satish Chandra. He's walking extremely slowly and he's got a stick in his hand. He's wearing the kind of clothes that people wear. So what do you see? What you see is, you'll say, ah, let me go closer from another direction. You'll come closer. Now you're able to see my face. And it turns out to be Satish Chandra. Now take both instances. One instance is where there is no Satish Chandra. I mean, it's not Satish Chandra. You saw one fat blob who looked like him, but is not him. In the second scenario, you've seen a fat blob that looks like Satish Chandra, and you say, let me confirm it. And you confirm it. It is Satish Chandra. Now, what Hegel will tell you is that you have taken a series of steps. Doesn't matter. It might be one step, two steps, three steps, four steps. Hegel does not prescribe that the dialectic has only two steps or three steps. Hegel says it can be 20 steps. Or Hegel will say it can be 10 steps. But the point is, you have been able to establish that this is Satish Chandra. So what is this? This is a confirmation. It is a confirmation of the idea that this is Satish Chandra. Now let's take the other scenario, the first scenario. The first scenario was where you found that it wasn't Satish Chandra, somebody who looked like him, but that is not Satish Chandra. So what does this say then? Hegel will say this is also a confirmation. It's a confirmation that it is not Satish Chandra. It's funny talking about myself like this. But anyway, so let me quickly end it before people think that I'm some kind of a narcissist who likes to talk about himself. So it might have taken you 5 steps, it might have taken you 6 steps to arrive at the idea that this is not Satish Chandra. Hegel will still say this is a confirmation. Why are we calling it a confirmation? We are calling it a confirmation because of the fact that, to put things simply, you have got rid of the doubt whether this is Satish Chandra or not. And how have you done it? You've done it dialectically. Is it him? Is it not him? Seems to be like him, but is it him? He's walking like him, but is it him? He also has a stick, but is it him? So there is a question following each time you build a proposition in your mind. So finally, when there is a rejection of doubt that this is not Satish Chandra or this is Satish Chandra, both of them tantamount to the same conclusion. And when I say the same conclusion, it basically means that it tantamounts to that one particular idea that you have been through a series, you have been through a series of confirmations and non-confirmations, finally leading to confirmation that this is or this is not. So you thought this may be Satish Chandra. It turns out to be Satish Chandra. So this is the easy part of it. The easy part of it is that, okay, this is Satish Chandra. The difficult part is the confirmation that this is not Satish Chandra. That is also a confirmation. Please remember that. That is not, you're not leaving it in the air. You have decided that this fat blob is not Satish Chandra. So that is how dialectics operate in Hegel. Now, when it comes to Marx, what is he talking about when he talks about dialectics? For Marx, the history What, Padma, after asking my question, you disappeared. Okay. Now, according to Marx, the history of human beings is the history of class struggle. He says that every period in history has two opposing classes which are in an exploitative relationship. So, what does this mean? What is Karl Marx's scheme of history? Karl Marx says that the first period of human history is the hunter gatherer stage. The second is nomadic agriculturist. Why do I keep writing stage? The third is the feudal stage. The fourth is the capitalist. Now, Marx is not saying that this is what the history of the human beings is fully. Not at all. I must give you a clarification. There are two schools of thought within Marxism. One which will say hunter-gatherer stage is something that precedes the nomadic agriculturist stage. And then you have the feudal stage. And after that, you have the capitalist stage. So I don't have to tell you about the hunter-gatherer. It is self-explanatory. People went on hunts, killed an animal, brought it back, and ate it. Okay. Now, the interesting thing that Marx says here is, if a group of 20 people went to kill it, and it's a big animal that they killed, it took the effort of all the 20 people to kill the animal. These people have no special rights over it because they have killed it. What he's saying is that as hunter gatherers, it is their responsibility. It is entirely their responsibility to bring food back to the tribe or the group of people who are existing. Now, he doesn't see anything wrong with women not going and hunting, because women are looking after the homely chores that have to be looked after. So for him, it is more or less a perfect division of labor. It's a perfect division of labor where the young and able bodied people go and hunt and come back with food, and everybody in the tribe eats the food. Now, here, nobody is saying, I killed this animal, so I need to get a larger share. That animal is killed, it's cooked, and people eat as much as each of them wants. It's quite possible that the person who actually killed it does not have a big appetite. So he'll not eat too much of it. Then there is this thing that there may be somebody like me, a cripple, who can't go out and hunt and all that kind of stuff, but who's doing some other minor chores that can be done. If I have a big appetite, then I am basically going to eat more, even though I didn't have anything to do with the killing of that animal. So this, Marx says, is an equalitarian society. The primitive society is an equalitarian society. Like I said, some people say that it has two stages, the primitive society. One is the hunter-gatherer, and the second is the nomadic agriculturist. Now, why did people have to go to nomadic agriculture? See, there is an extent to how much you can kill. Even today, this is an example I keep giving again and again. Even today, if you look at a tribal, if a tribal wants to take honey, harvest honey from a honey bee's nest, he only takes 1/4 of it. He only takes 1/4 of it, leaves the rest of the nest as it is. Why? Because as long as that nest is there, bees are going to come, and bees are basically going to rebuild the nest. So every time if you take a small part out, the bee doesn't go away. The honey bee, it doesn't go away. It'll be where it is, and it'll keep building the nest again, and people go and harvest a part of it again. So that is the hunter-gatherer life. Now, some people say that these are not two different stages, that they are one and the same. But I think it would make sense to say that in the primitive period, there are two stages in Marx. Because doing agriculture is a certain form of doing cultivation. So if you're going to cultivate, then you need to have some kind of expertise, some kind of technique as to how you will cultivate which plant and how much will you cultivate. 1 second, please. So how much will you cultivate depends upon the availability of tools and some kind of primitive technology of cultivating. People had to identify land which was fertile. People had to make sure that there was water near the land where they were going to cultivate. So if you look at all these things, then what becomes obvious is that the nomadic agricultural stage can be considered as being slightly distinct from the hunter-gatherer stage. It's an evolutionary step where now instead of going and chasing food, you are cultivating your own food. And it's nomadic because the land doesn't belong to anyone. People cultivate the land as long as it is fertile. When it is no longer fertile, they move on. That is what Marx says. The next stage is the feudal stage. Now, what is the big difference between the feudal stage and the primitive stage? Like I said, the primitive stage is relatively egalitarian. Not too many people are bothered about who is going to, not too many people are bothered about who's going to do what. So what we find in the feudal stage is that people now lay claim to land. Till then, nothing belonged to anyone. So there was no private property as such. The absence of private property defines this particular phase. Okay. And if you look at the feudal stage, which follows the primitive stage, there is now the introduction of private property. People who are strong, people who are powerful, they lay claim to land and say, this is my land. I don't know how many of you have read novels about the Wild West. The Wild West is something that was there in the United States of America during the 18th and 19th centuries. And what was the Wild West? The Wild West was people went in bands. Remember, America, virgin continent, the only people who are living there are the American Indians, and these people are devoid of sophistication. So, with their superior arms, superior weaponry, the white people were able to conquer the American Indians, defeat them, and take over land. And there's plenty of land because America is one of the bigger countries in the world, land-wise. There's plenty of land. And at one time, various governments actually asked people to go and occupy these lands so that they can, finish off the threat of the native people. They were given incentives. So you could have guns. Till today in America, you can carry a gun. Nobody will ask you, why are you carrying a gun? You can carry a gun. There is a distinct lobby called the gun lobby, which controls the votes, of the Electoral College. If you remove the gun thing, then you lose. The gun lobby is so powerful. So why was the gun lobby encouraged in the first place? Because if you're going and settling somewhere far away from civilization, then if you had to fight and take care of yourselves, how would you do it? You would do it by protecting your land, by protecting. Today you must have heard of this expression, brand equity. Somebody will tell you that one of the most powerful brands in the world is Apple. Now you put me in a big fix because the gun lobby, there are no parties in the USA, by the way. Okay, that I'll save for another day. What you need to do is that you just need to know that there are no parties, there are no membership to parties. There are what are called caucuses, caucus, caucuses. So you have a Republican caucus, you have a Democratic caucus. And my old history teacher once told me a wonderful, when I asked him, what is the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans? He said, the Democrats are basically donkeys, because that is their symbol, by the way. And the Republicans are white elephants. They are a burden on the country. That is the difference, he said. It took me a while to understand, but what it basically means is that there is no party, though they say it's a Republican Party. In America, I don't know if you know this bit of history, there have been more than 250 parties at various junctures in American life, various junctures. So there are no parties there. What you have are caucuses. And the gun lobby is there in both the caucuses. It's there in the Democratic caucus. It is there in the uh, Republican caucus. That's what makes American politics so interesting. They are very, very interesting because of the fact that, except for the fact that there is a difference of opinion between the Democrats and the, what should I say, uh, the Democrats and the uh, Republicans, there isn't really a big thing to choose between the two of them because they all stand for the same thing. The only difference is that the Democrats like to portray themselves as progressive. So they encourage lesbianism, homosexuality, same sex marriages. They encourage all these things. So the Democrats consider themselves progressive, whereas the Republicans are supposed to be conservative. They mainly comprise of church-going people, people who go to church, and pray to God, which the Democrat also might do, but won't do it as a ritual, which is what the Republican does. So if you want to know the real difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, this is the difference. The rest of them are all over everything else. They are very, very similar. It doesn't matter who is what, and all those things. Anyway, so to come back to what I was saying, America is a good example of expansion of land and expansion of cattle. As long as there are lands, as long as there is grass to be grazed, there are all kinds of cattle. There are horses. So if you, like I was saying, if you haven't read, you must, after your exams, start reading novels by Louis L'Amour, Louis, Louis, L apostrophe Amour, Louis L'Amour. He's the one who's written some absolutely, absolutely wonderful novels about what exactly happened in the Wild West. So the Wild West was conquered by driving out the citizens, not citizens, sorry, the original natives, putting them in reservations, and the white people took that over. Now, talking of branding, I was talking to you about that. What is a brand? Hmm? Why is Apple a brand? This is actually by extension that Apple is a brand. Otherwise, Apple is not a brand. Google is not a brand. Microsoft is not a brand. Brand originally meant when people gathered up this cattle which didn't belong to anyone and said, let's take this cattle, make this cattle ours. What did they do? They used the branding iron. So if Akshay Puneet captured 1,000 head of cattle and he wanted to make sure that his cattle is not stolen by someone else, then he would make a branding iron on which he would write APP. If you ask me, he would have written a third P, Pantulu. Okay, so APP. So what do? You take this iron, heat it, in fire, heat it completely till it is glowing red hot. Take that iron and put it on the skin, on the rump of the cattle. So what happens with that? That APP, Akshay Puneet Podishetty, that brand is now established. So now nobody can steal cattle from Akshay Puneet Podishetty because he has put his brand. After he has put his brand on it, nobody would dare to say, this is my cattle. So it's been the story of the powerful, which is exactly what happened even in feudalism. Even in feudalism, people gathered up land as if they had might and money. They gathered up land. Then they also gathered up all kinds of, what should I say? They gathered up cattle, branded it. So that is the feudal period. The beginning of the feudal period, where you will find that people are now saying, this is mine. This is mine. This land is mine. You'll fence up the land. You'll keep the cattle inside and say, this cattle is mine. You'll have cow punchers who are more normally called cowboys. These were the people who took care of the cattle, and they needed horses to take care of the cattle, to round them up, something that is faster than the cattle. So they started rounding up horses. They started taking horses as such. So as a result, basically what happened is that you have the establishment of feudalism. And if somebody wanted to do agriculture, then you had to work for someone else. You had to work for this landlord who had occupied huge territories, occupied cattle, who had brought cattle by branding them. So that is feudalism. And feudalism is the birth of private property. Feudalism is the true birth of private property, where people will say, this is my land. These are my cattle. These are my horses. These are my workers. So that is how you have the inauguration of private property in the feudal stage. So, if you look at the feudal stage, what the feudal stage shows to us is the inauguration of the concept of private property. And it also creates classes: the landed gentry and the landless peasant who has to work on the land of the landed gentry. He would get a wage. As feudalism became more and more complicated, I don't want to go into that. Then people started renting out land, collecting money, taxes. So all these things came into being. So feudalism is where you see the birth of private property. And you'll also see that the aristocrat, the one who owns all these lands, cattle, he doesn't work. He doesn't work at all. He just sits and expects people to work for him. And from the money that they generate, he takes the full money and gives a little back to them as wage. So the feudal stage is the beginning of classes. The dominant class, which is the aristocrat, and the dominated class, who's the landless peasant. So Marx would say that the feudal stage represents the inauguration of private property. And what does it do while it is doing this? It negates the primitive stage where everything was equalitarian relatively, where everybody worked, but now everybody doesn't work. Some people work, some people don't work. So that becomes the feudal stage. Now, after this comes the capitalist stage. I told you feudalism died in Europe, in Japan, because of the greed of those who were rulers. Feudal economies are agrarian economies. They are agrarian economies. And these agrarian economies are the ones that basically are at the whims and fancies of the weather. If it rains adequately, good. But if it rains too much, bad, you because it spoils the crop, or if it doesn't rain at all, then you can't grow the crop. So taxation cannot be consistent. I get a consistent salary. So the taxation on my salary is also something that is consistent. So every year you can collect the same amount of tax from me. Why? Because I'm getting the same amount or a little more perhaps, a little more. So I am getting my money, so I have to pay a tax, which I will. But suppose if I was in a position where this year I earn 2 lakhs, next year, due to bountiful rainfall, I earn 4 lakhs and you tax me for 4 lakhs, which I will pay. And if you look at the year after that, where I have got an earning of only a lakh of rupees, how can I pay a tax that I was paying on 4 lakhs on 1 lakh rupees? So that is how feudalism functioned, became weak. Whole of the society, including the lords and the kings, became poor. And that was when feudalism was replaced by capitalism. Now you can see the influence of Hegel here on Marx. Marx calls capitalism the negation of a negation. So which is the first negation? The first negation is the feudal period, which more or less, not more or less, which definitely, definitely got rid of the uh, what should we say? The feudal stage got rid of the primitive stage. It got rid of the primitive stage. So it negated the primitive stage. So feudalism is the first negation. Feudalism was negated by capitalism. So capitalism is the second negation, and in that sense, it is a negation of a negation. I'll stop here today because if I go on, then I will go on for a long time. I have been told due to my hypoxia condition not to talk too much, which I don't know how not to do. The only thing I know is to talk, and that to rubbish, complete rubbish. So tomorrow In the morning? What time should we have a class? Somebody give me.
Sir, I have a doubt.
Yes.
What did Marx say is it applicable for every society, be it India, Europe, or is it only applicable to a particular section of society?
Uh, Marx's theory is not universally applicable. It is not universally applicable because one of his admirers, Vera Zasulish, often used to correspond with him. And she asked him a question: is it necessary to have a capitalist stage in order to have a communist revolution? And Marx is extremely vague. Marx is very, very vague in his reply. He says maybe it is possible, maybe it is not. Conditions have to ripen for the class consciousness of the people to of the oppressed classes. Their class consciousness has to basically get the class consciousness should basically be uh, strongly built. And he said, I don't know if it can be built in the feudal period. As far as India is concerned, he wrote something which is called the Asiatic mode of production, which even a Marxist, a hard-boiled Marxist, will tell you is wrong. It's completely wrong. Marx basically saw India as unchanging. Nothing had happened here, which is not an accurate depiction. A lot of things had happened here, which he missed out in his reading of history. So it's not universally applicable, is my answer to you.
Sir, did India saw capitalism?
Sorry?
Did India experience capitalism?
What do you think we are experiencing now? Capitalism has been imported by us through colonialism. We did not develop, unlike in Europe, where societies developed as capitalist societies there. Countries developed as capitalist countries there. We didn't become like that. Through colonialism, we acquired capitalism. We are today a capitalist nation. As capitalist as America, UK, any capitalist country. We are a very capitalist country.
Okay, sir.
But for us, it came from outside. Whereas in Europe, it came from inside. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Any other questions?
No, sir, thank you.
All right. What time should we meet tomorrow morning? I want to take 2 classes, please, because I want to first finish this Marx fellow off and then go to Habermas and Foucault.
At 11, sir, is it suitable for you?
11 is suitable to me. Absolutely
Okay.
suitable. So should we have a class at 11?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Sir.
We'll have a class at 11 and again at 5:30.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay.
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 Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye, sir.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you.
Bye, Kavya.